Hello, and thank you for joining the Moveworks Agentic Automation weekly webinar. This week, our topic is on PagerDuty incidents and incident assignee queries. When we come back from the holiday break on January 8th, we're going to be doing HubSpot opportunity management lookups. So for today's agenda, we're going to give a high-level overview of Moveworks Agentic Automation Engine. We're going to go through a Purple Chat Builder example as well as a demo implementation of PagerDuty incidents and incident assignee queries, and then we'll have a Q&A session at the end. First, let's talk about building on the new Moveworks Agentic Automation Engine. So the Moveworks Agentic Automation Engine is an enhancement of Moveworks Creator Studio and allows you to create plugins for your Moveworks Copilot so that you can deploy custom solutions tailored to your business. All of it is built on our underlying agentic reasoning engine. This is the process that the Copilot uses for deciding what plugin or what skill is the best to serve a user for their particular needs. On top of the agentic reasoning engine, we have the manifest generator. This is how the Copilot distills the information that we put into our plugins and decides when that plugin will be served to a user, in addition to our triggering statements. The plugin execution engine, this is the engine that actually drives the execution, so does the underlying functionality that we configure when we build out our agentic automation use cases. And the action orchestrator, which is the system that actually makes the selection of the plugin based on the manifest generator. The plugins themselves are composed of triggers. So these are the statements that we expect users to make or the questions we expect them to ask that should trigger a given plugin. Slot resolvers, which is the concept of resolving variables based on a user's utterance. So when they refer to themselves, understanding who they are in an environment, when they refer to their boss, or when they refer to end of day last week, understanding that that is Friday, December 13th, I believe. Policy validators, which is the rules or conditions that we set alongside a plugin when we implement it, and then the actions and activities, which are the actual API calls that we're making to the endpoint systems. We can use a plugin to chain multiple actions together into a single flow, define a payload schema, write scripts that manipulate the data that is passed into the plugin, and prompt the model using natural language. This is a visual overview of the composition of an agentic automation plugin. At the most minute level, we have the underlying individual action. So an individual action is the API call that we make to a given environment. In this case, we're going to be getting incidents back from an environment. But the compound action section allows us to write these actions in sequence. So if we have several actions that we need to do, let's say we need to get information from an endpoint system and then use that information to make a post request and a follow-up action, we can tie these together under a compound action. And then once we do that, we can promote it to a plugin, which is where we define the triggering criteria and make it available to be served as a solution to our end users. So an example of what we're trying to do today is we want to connect to our PagerDuty instance, and we want to be able to query for open incidents that exist in the environment. And we want to be able to see who the current assignee is and some basic information about the incident. So we expect a user to come in and be able to ask a question like, do we have any open or ongoing incidents? We'll see what's currently available in PagerDuty with a conditional query to make sure that the incidents are in an open state. And then we'll return a list of all of those incidents back to the user. Okay, let's hop into the demo so we can see what building this looks like. So first things first, let's look at our PagerDuty incidents. So right now, this is my PagerDuty instance. I have two open incidents. One is the default one for this new instance, and then one is a service not responding to users. These each have a different assignee. One is assigned to Tom, one is assigned to myself, John McGinley. So I can see that we have some active ones in the instance. So I'm going to go into my Moveworks bot. I'm in Moveworks setup currently. I'm going to click this icon on the upper right-hand side to navigate into Creator Studio. And then I'm going to navigate to the Actions section so that I can define the API call that we're going to make to get incidents from the environment. To define the API call, I'm referencing PagerDuty's underlying API documentation. And I have generated an API key by going to integrations, API access keys, and then generating one. The authentication configuration will start after we get our base URL. So the base URL for all PagerDuty instances is going to be the same. We're going to have this HTTPS endpoint for api.pagerduty.com. And then the endpoint URL in this case is going to be incidents. For our auth config, we generated an API key, so we can use API key auth. PagerDuty has a very specific syntax for what API key auth should look like. So validating this in a Postman environment or via curl requests, we can see that the syntax for this includes having an authorization key and then a value of this format where we have a token prefix and then a token equals to the API key that we have from our environment. So I'm going to copy that syntax by setting the auth key as authorization and then setting the value pattern as token, token equals, and then a %s symbol. This %s is going to resolve to the API key that I put in here, which I'm going to copy from my Postman environment. And then we also want to set parameters here. So when we make a query to the incident endpoint for the PagerDuty API, we can add this statuses section to only grab incidents that are of a particular status. In this case, we're not interested in any incidents that are resolved. We're only interested in ones that are either triggered or acknowledged. So I'm going to copy these parameters into my agentic automation action. So I'm going to add two parameters here. They're both going to be statuses as a list. And then the values of the statuses that I want to be available for my use case, which are triggered and acknowledged. We don't need any body or input variables since this is a simple GET request. So we should be able to test this and validate that we can reach the instance. And I can see I have no incidents that are under acknowledgement, but I do have two that are under triggered. And this is aligned with what I see in my Postman environment. And I can also see that Moveworks was able to successfully generate an output schema in the format provided by the API response to the left-hand side. So we'll be good to save this. I'll name the connector PagerDuty API connection. I've saved that. So I'll see it in my actions. PagerDuty API connection, and then let me change this to PagerDuty list incidents. Because the actual action that I'm going to be doing with this is listing incidents, so it'll make it more clear in my compound action workflow what the purpose of that particular action is. So next, I'm going to go to compound actions, and we're going to create our workflow. So I'll call this compound action name PagerDuty list open incidents. And then we want to make sure that we provide a robust description and action name. Recall that the manifest generator is going to take all of this metadata information and use it to help the action orchestrator decide when this plugin will be called. So the action description and action name are relevant for triggering and making sure that the triggering is working as expected. This helps the bot understand that it is PagerDuty that we're building this integration with and that we're specifically trying to retrieve incidents from PagerDuty. And now we're going to define our scripting logic. So the first thing that we need to do is define our steps. And then we're going to use the action that we just defined. So this action has an output key, a name, progress updates, and then we also need to do that. Okay. So we have our first step. Our first step is going to be grabbing the open incidents from the PagerDuty environment. We have our default on complete or on pending messages. These are going to be dependent upon the information that we input for the API description. And then we have an output key, PagerDuty list incidents results. I'm just going to change this to incident list so that it's a little simpler to work with. So this will pull all of the open incidents in the environment, and it will take that object and put it into this incident list variable. And then what we want to do is return that variable. Whenever we return, we're going to define an output mapper. And then in this case, we have a response that is an object that contains an item that is a list of objects. So what we're going to want to do is iterate through that list so that we can grab all of the open incidents in our environment. So since we want to iterate through a list, I'm going to use the map function, and I'm going to pull out the variables in that list that I'm interested in presenting back to the user. Since I'm using the map function, I have to use the converter key. And then I'm going to predefine my items. Items is the reference for the top level object that we want to iterate through with this map. And whenever we want to access an output key from a previous action, it's all going to be housed under an object simply called data. So I can access this instant list by saying data.incident_list.incidents. The reason I am saying .incidents is so that I can step into this object. And the next thing is the list. So our map function is going to iterate through that list because we're starting from the incident key. And now I simply have to assign the fields that I want to present back to the user in this map function. So I could say that the title is going to be item.title, assignee, item.assignments, and description, item.description, and status, item.status. So on the left-hand side, I'm defining a key. These could technically be any value. And then on the right-hand side, I am pulling each of these fields from each item in the list. So again, referring to our API response, I have a title, I have a description, I have a status, and then I have an assignment object. In this case, assignments is an entire list, and then it's a list of user objects that contains the assignee. We could do an additional mapping function here, or try to dot walk into this to grab this specific summary key, which refers to the actual user's name, who is the assignee. But I'm simply going to set the assignee key to the overall assignments object. So that will be this entire block. And then I'm going to rely on the natural language model and the underlying processing to grab the actual user identification out of this object based on the fact that I have titled it assignee. So this goes back to the concept of a slot resolver. We in normal assignment terms, we would expect that assigning a field to an entire object like that has the potential of returning the entire object. But from a natural language perspective, we're defining this object under the keyword assignee. So it gives the model a hint that the only thing that we're actually interested in under that object is a real user's name, who is the assignee for this ticket, or this incident rather. So now that we're iterating through our list of incidents and we're pulling out all the relevant fields that we would like, we could submit this. And then if we ever need to add fields to this, we could always come back and add them in our converter section. So I'm going to submit this. And then to make this available to end users on our environment, we're going to want to publish this workflow to a plugin. So I'm going to select that, and then it will fill out the basic information in the plugin section on my behalf based on what I put in when I built the compound action. User consent required before execution. In this case, I'm going to leave that unchecked because we don't really need consent for a GET request. And then informational message to present to the user during execution. We're just going to say, reaching out to PagerDuty to retrieve a list of open incidents. Here we can define triggering. So we'll have to define at least 5 triggering examples. And this helps the model understand what type of questions should it trigger this use case for to retrieve this information. For this particular use case, because we're talking about listing incidents, I would spend a good amount of time on the triggering, especially if we're in a ServiceNow-based organization where the bot maybe already interacts with incident ticket types in our environment. We want to make sure that it understands that the incidents in this case are related to PagerDuty. So if you have a ServiceNow environment and you're interested in implementing this use case, I would really focus on the triggering and make sure that it is working as expected for the types of questions that you expect to present back incidents from PagerDuty versus incidents from the ServiceNow environment. So I have 5 positive examples here. So I'm going to click next. And then I'm going to select a launch option. Right now, I'm just going to launch it to myself so that I can validate the behavior. The ready to be launched in production flag is for analytic purposes. I'm not interested in analytics since I'm just testing it right now, so we'll leave that unchecked. And then the data redaction, I'm also not interested in right now because there's no sensitive data being translated here. So I'm going to launch that. So in the next few minutes, this use case should be available to me in my Moveworks bot. Bring that up on the side. And then let me reference one of my triggering phrases for validation. So I'm going to go to my Slack tenant. which should now be visible. And I'm going to ask the bot to start by saying hi. So we see reaching out to PagerDuty to retrieve a list of open incidents, and it has summarized the result. So it used the manifest generator to consolidate the information that I provided it, used that in the messaging that it gave back to me, successfully reached out to PagerDuty, and then gave me a summary of the two incidents that are available in my environment. So we have one that is a sample incident alert. So this is the title, the status of it, and the assignee of it. We also have the second one, which is also in a triggered status and is assigned to a different user. If I wanted to, I could add any of the available fields in the API response. So anything that is available here to my workflow, and it would also be available for summarization via the bot. So I could add the escalation policy, the related team, the urgency, the type, etc. Okay. So that concludes the demo. Next, let's talk about how to learn more. I highly, highly recommend taking our Creator Studio Developer Certification course. This has guiding training modules for all of the core concepts of Creator Studio, which apply nearly one-to-one with Moveworks agentic automation. The UI may be different, but most of the underlying concepts are the same. The most important difference, of course, being the workflow and being able to combine actions into a compound action. We have step-by-step videos detailing different key use cases of Creator Studio, so you can see how to build out those connectors and make some of those frequent calls that we see. And you can get a certification after taking multiple choice exams to display on your LinkedIn. I also recommend checking out our documentation and developer community. We have a Creator Studio developer community on our community site where you can talk to product owners, Moveworks engineers such as myself, as well as engineers at our customer organizations who are working to build out use cases for their environments. We also have some tutorials and guides, and we have developer documentation with a plugin library. Have a wonderful day, and thank you for joining.